Assalamualaikum and hi. In this video, we're going to go through a Java programming task as follows. The question sounds like this. Suppose you work for a beverage company seeking the optimal cost for a cylindrical container. And before you initiating the loop here, your program should prompt the user for input. In this case, will be how many users. During each loop iterations, the program will request the user to input the volume and also the radius. It would then calculate and display the height and cost of the container based on the formula given below. You should have a sample output like this. Of course, you need to first ask how many users involved, and then you need to ask each of the user, the volume, and also the radius. You should display the height and the cost, and that will be your subtask here. Question A, draw a flowchart for the problem above. You can have something like this where you have the start, and first you ask for the user input. In this case will be the number of user. I would then initialize I. This I can be 1 or 0, depends how you want to structure your program. And then I would check on the counter here. As long as my I is still less than the number of user, that's why I say is I greater than the number. If no, then I will proceed with the next stage where I will again ask for the user input, but here will be the volume and radius. Based on the user input, then I will move on to the process to do the calculations using the formula given. Once I have done with the calculations, I will show the height and also the cost. And I would then do counter here or increase my I here. That's why I have I++. So that will move on, for example, from user 1 to user 2. I'll check whether it's still less than the number of user. If no, then I'll repeat the process. If yes, then I will end the program. Then we can move on to question B, where it says based on your answer in A, okay, which is this flowchart here, you will need to write a program to find the height and also the cost. I've actually written something here, but it's not complete programs because I would like to separate the whole task into a few subtasks so that you can have a better understanding how we actually approach this problem here. Now, if you look back into the flowchart here, what we do first is we ask how many users are involved, and then we have a looping here to check whether my counter is still less than the number of the user input by the user. So for the first part here, I do a simple looping. I initialize my I as 1. As I said, you can initialize it as 0 or 1, but then you will need to twist a little bit of your code later on. I think for better understanding, you just declare it as 1. So integer I equal to 1, then I do while I is less than or equal to 10, I'll print, for example, user, and then I do I++. So basically this part 1 here represent from start here up until the decisions here. I skip the input process output, but I do the counter here. Okay, and then of course I do the exit as well. Now if we run this, you will see user 1, 2, 3 up until 10. So which is correct in this case. But I can twist this a little bit because I already have the scanner class. So I might just ask how many users involved. So what I do here is I do system.out.println. I'll just say how many users, right? I'll just type here how many users. Okay? And I will then get the user input, where in this case I will do integer number of user, okay, equal to, I'll use my scanner object. Of course, I will need to use the next integer method here. So since I have the number of user here, so I will change this 10. Instead of doing a constant here, I do number of user, okay. So you will see here, if I run this again, you'll see that how many user, for example, if I put 10, I will see from 1 to 10. But of course, if let's say I change it to 3 only, I will see user 1, 2, 3. So I've done with the first part. Now let's move on to the second part. I'm not going to integrate the looping yet because I want to show you bit by bit and then how you can actually integrate everything into your full programs. And in fact, this is what you should do when you try to approach a programming task. I've mentioned that previously, where you should not do everything, then only you do the compilations, because it's very hard for you to do the debugging. Now let's move on to part 2 here. Part 2 here, we know that we need to ask for the user input. In this case will be volume and so radius. And then I do the calculations. I have the formula already and just do the output. So what I do here is I create the scanner object because I need to ask for the user input. And I put in the instructions here, enter the volume and also the radius, then enter the volume. The volume is in the form of integer. Of course, you can declare doubles, float as you like. In the questions, it does not specify what will be the data type. So I think it's fine. You do not need to, use double, float. You can use integer. In fact, if you look into the sample output here, here is merely just integer, right? So I'll use integer here. Enter the volume. I assign that to my variable volume, and I have entered the radius. Again, I assign that to radius. I don't even do the calculations yet, so I just want to make sure that I can actually get volume and radius from the user. So I run this, okay, enter the volume, for example, 10, enter the radius 2. Okay, so I can actually get the volume and radius, which is 10 and 2, as you can see here. So I've done with the input. Now I want to move on to the process. So I put that as part 3, where we do the calculations. I didn't integrate that with the part 2. So I just initialize it where I say my volume is 10, my radius is 2. Then I create the formula. So these two formula are created based on the formula presented here. So where we have H is equal to V divided by pi R squared, and then C is equal to 2 pi R multiply R plus H. So we know that pi here is 3.142. You can actually use math.pi in Java to do that. So I translate both of the formula into Java codes here, and I just print the height and also the cost. So if you notice, the cost presented in the sample output is only 3 decimal points. So I move one step further by using the format specifier to limit the number of decimal points that are going to shown for cost. Even this requirement is not stated in the questions. So if you didn't do that, that's fine as well. So let's run this. Assume that my volume is 10, my radius is 2. I get the height 0.79577, and the cost will be 35.133. Okay, so I have done with all 3 parts. Now I'm going to integrate everything into a single program. So what I do first is I'm going to copy the first part here and paste it here in a new code cell. And of course, in this while loop, I would then need to have the part 2. So I didn't copy the import and also the object because we know that we can actually reuse that. I will copy up until system.out print line. And I'm going to put it here. Well, before I integrate part 3, let's run this first. For simplicity, we just do 2 user. I have 2 user. User 1, enter the volume. Let's say it's 2. Enter the radius is 1. Then I move on to the second user. Let's say volume is 3. And then radius is 5. Okay. So part 1, part 2 combined together works perfectly fine. Now I'm going to put in part 3. I just need to copy and paste the formula and also the output. Now this should be somewhere here. And again, make sure that I have proper indentations. Now I can run the programs where, let's say if it's 2 user, it can be 10, and I have 2, so 12 and 3. Okay, so the program works fine here. Now basically we are done with the subtask B here. We just need to write a programs. If you notice, write a programs to find the height and the cost. So we have done that. C is we need to find the maximum cost that have been computed. So for example, in this case, I will need to show that the maximum cost will be from user 2, 64.549. So how can I do that is I will need to first declare a variables, where in this case, I will say, for example, double max is equal to 0. Okay, I initialize a variable max with the data type double, and the initial value will be 0. Then we need to do some comparison. So what I'll do here is I will add in a conditional statement here, where if I say if the cost is greater than max, then max will be the cost. Okay, so for example, now if the input by the first user is 10 and 2 and my cost is 35.133, so if 35.133 here is greater than my max, which is 0, because I initialize it as 0, then my max will be equal to the cost. What is my cost for the first user is 35.133. So now my max becomes 35.133. Now if I move on to the second loop and I input the volume 12, radius 3, I get the cost, which is 64.549. Now I'll move on to the conditions here. So if my cost, now my cost is 64.549. If my cost is greater than max, what is my max? My max now is 35.133 after the first loop. So now I've updated my max. So my max will be 64.549. Okay. So what I'm going to do at the end here is I'm just going to show the max value. Okay. After each of the loop. So here I can say the max volume or the max cost is, okay, do a string concatenations here, max. Okay, let's run this. Okay, I will need to have 3 users. For example, in this case, I'm still going to use 10 and 2, right? Volume's 10, radius is 2. The second example that I've used just now will be, let me have a look, will be 12 and 3. Okay, 12 and 3. Okay, so I put 12 and 3. And for the final user, I'll just put 1 and 1. Okay, to make sure that the maximum is actually the second user, just for testing. So you can see here, the maximum cost here is 64.548, which is from the second user. Because if we look into the third user, it's only 8.283 here. Well, of course, here I just need to add a space, right? So by adding a very simple conditional statement, you can actually find the maximum cost. So I think that's it for the solutions of this exercise. Thank you very much.